Every big industry creates middlemen, people who don't make the product and don't buy it, but stand between the two and take a cut of everything that passes through. Most stay small, but every so often, a middleman grows so powerful that he stops serving the industry and quietly becomes part of its foundation. Richer than the people creating the value, powerful enough that when the industry finally tried to cut him down, it was the industry that lost. Football is the easiest place to watch this happen. Not because football is uniquely greedy, but because the business is unusually transparent. Tens of billions of dollars flow through a sport watched by nearly half the planet, while a handful of people most fans have never heard of quietly shape where that money goes. Watch football closely enough, and you start seeing the same pattern everywhere else. Because this isn't the story of one brilliant agent. It's the story of how a small group of dealmakers turned standing in the middle of a transaction into one of the most profitable businesses in modern sport. To see how, go back to 2016. Paul Pogba moved from Juventus to Manchester United for around 105 million euros, a world record transfer at the time. Every headline belonged to Pogba. Every camera followed Pogba. But the biggest winner in that deal was someone else. Leaked documents later revealed that Pogba's agent, Mino Raiola, earned roughly 49 million euros from that single transfer, close to what the player himself was expected to earn in wages over the entire length of his contract. The number alone is astonishing. What makes it extraordinary is where the money came from. Raiola was not paid by just one side of the deal. He was financially tied to all three at once: the buying club, the selling club, and the player himself. While the whole world watched one of the biggest transfers in football history, one man sat quietly at the center of it, collecting money from almost everyone involved. That is the part that cameras never capture. When a club unveils a superstar, the applause belongs to the player, the manager who wanted him, and the owner who agreed to pay for him. But the biggest winner is often someone else, the person standing just outside the frame. At the highest level of football, an agent is no longer just a representative. He becomes part of the system itself, the road the money has to travel down. And every time it does, he takes a share. So, stay with me. Because by the end of this video, a transfer will no longer look like a football story. It will look like what it really is: one of the most sophisticated money-moving machines in modern sport. So how did a handful of men standing outside the spotlight end up with this much influence over the world's biggest game? To answer that, we have to follow the money, not onto the pitch, but into the rooms where transfers are really made. Start with the scale of the cash, because it is hard to believe until you see it. Modern football is soaked in money. In 2023, total spending on player transfers across world football hit an all-time record of nearly $10 billion in a single year. And almost every time a player moves, an agent is standing nearby with a hand quietly open. According to football's own governing body, clubs spent close to $900 million on agent fees in that same year. Pure commission, paid in 12 months to the people who do nothing but arrange the deals. That is more than the entire annual income of plenty of professional clubs. An invisible surcharge running underneath the sport skimmed off the top of nearly every signing. But the strangest part is that this business does not look like a monopoly. And that is exactly why it is so difficult to see. There is no single company controlling football representation. No obvious giant dominating the entire market. Power is spread across a small circle of super agencies and kingmakers who quietly sit behind many of the biggest deals in world football. Which makes the system harder to notice and much harder to challenge. So before we can understand how they became this powerful, we first need to know who they are. Two of the giants are American. One was built by Creative Artists Agency, the Hollywood machine that also represents film stars and pop musicians, which absorbed the British agency Stellar and an operation called Base and welded them into a football empire now managing players worth more than 2 billion euros. The other, the Wasserman Group, grew the way it always grows by buying rival agencies across Europe until it too controlled well over 100 top league players. Between them, they are scale and consolidation, the corporate end of the business. If a club is buying, one of them probably has someone on the short list. But the most interesting power here is not American. It is Portuguese. Gestafute, built by Jorge Mendes, is not about volume at all. It is about influence. A tight network of elite players, elite managers, and most importantly, clubs. Mendes made his name carrying Cristiano Ronaldo from club to club to club, and where the Americans win on numbers, he wins on relationships. The quiet kingmaker who can move a single star or an entire dressing room with a handful of calls. And then there is the man who proved how far one person can go. Mino Raiola, the agent from the Pogba deal, was never the biggest agency in the world. He did not need to be. He picked public fights with the giants of Europe, treated club executives as opponents, carried stars like Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Erling Haaland, and showed the whole industry that a single intermediary could become as famous and nearly as powerful as the clubs themselves. He died in 2022, but the archetype he built is still the ceiling everyone else measures themselves against. 30 years ago, football agents looked nothing like they do today. Fathers represented their sons, local lawyers handled a few players. Former footballers relied on old contacts. Everybody knew one club, one city, one corner of the game. Then the money arrived, and with it came the corporate playbook. Why fight for players one by one when you can buy the agency that already represents them? So that's exactly what happened. One acquisition became another, then another, until what had once been a crowded street market slowly turned into a shopping mall owned by a handful of corporate landlords. Once you reach that size, competing becomes almost impossible. A teenager isn't choosing between two agents anymore. He's choosing between one man with a phone and an organization with lawyers, accountants, sponsorship teams, media specialists, and analysts all working under the same roof. For most families, that isn't much of a choice. The independent agent wasn't beaten. He was simply priced out of the game. So how does someone who never steps onto the pitch end up making more money than the people playing on it? The answer is less dramatic than you might expect. Agents don't have some secret business model. They just take a percentage. A percentage of the transfer fee, a percentage of the player's salary, another from the signing bonus. Then come image rights, sponsorships, and commercial deals. On paper, none of those percentages looks particularly impressive. The transfer does all the heavy lifting. 20 years ago, a record transfer might have been worth 30 million euros. Today, crossing 100 million is no longer unusual. The agent is still doing roughly the same job. Meetings, phone calls, long negotiations. The percentage barely changed. The money did. And there is one detail that explains almost everything else in this business. Agents only get paid when players move. This is where fans and agents start looking at the same player very differently. For fans, loyalty is everything. The one club legend, the captain kissing the badge. For an agent, the real money is usually made when something changes. A transfer doesn't just move a player. It creates a new contract, a new signing bonus, fresh commercial negotiations, new image rights deals. And every one of them creates another commission. A player who spends 8 years at one club may become a legend. But from a business perspective, he creates far fewer opportunities than a player who moves. That doesn't mean agents spend their days trying to push happy players out the door. Players outgrow clubs. Managers get replaced. New owners arrive. Better offers appear. Transfers happen for all kinds of reasons. But when they do, everyone around the table already knows where the money is. Every transfer reopens every revenue stream. Every new deal starts the cycle again. Which tells you what the real prize is. Representing a player is only the beginning. The real business is staying involved for as much of his career as possible. Find him young. Negotiate the first contract, handle the transfer, manage the commercial deals, then be there when the next opportunity comes. Over time, the biggest agencies stopped thinking in terms of individual transfers. They started thinking in terms of careers. A player is discovered early, developed through the right clubs, moved at the right moment, and at every step, the same network has another opportunity to earn. To the player, it feels like a football career. From the outside, it looks a lot more like a business model. And somewhere off camera, the fourth person just got paid again. If you want to see what this looks like in the real world, Wolverhampton Wanderers is probably the clearest example. In 2016, the club was bought by the Chinese conglomerate Fosun. A year earlier, Fosun had already invested in Jorge Mendes' agency, Gestafute. What happened next raised plenty of eyebrows. A Gestafute-linked manager arrived. Then came a steady stream of Gestafute clients, Ruben Neves, Diogo Jota, João Moutinho. One by one, Wolves began to look less like an ordinary Premier League club and more like a showcase for one agency's network. At one point in 2022, 12 of the 14 players involved in a Wolves match had all been signed through deals connected to Mendes. But here's where people usually get it wrong. To be fair, Wolves have always maintained that Jorge Mendes never controlled the club's transfer policy. After complaints from rival clubs, the arrangement was reviewed by the English authorities, who concluded that it did not break the rules. And that's what makes this story so interesting. This isn't a tale of secret corruption. It's a perfectly legal example of what happens when an agency becomes deeply woven into the strategy of a football club. Critics called Wolves a shop window for Mendes clients. Supporters pointed out that the club earned promotion, reached Europe, and made millions in the transfer market. Both things can be true, because the pipeline never had to be illegal to become incredibly powerful. And then the biggest agents discovered something even more profitable. Go back to the Pogba transfer, because Raiola sitting on all three sides of that deal was no accident. In football, it became known as multiple representation. In a normal transaction, an agent works for one client and gets paid by one client. But some agents realized they could represent the player, advise the selling club, and work with the buying club on the very same transfer. Suddenly, one deal could generate several commissions. The Football Leaks documents showed exactly how powerful that model had become, exposing a single intermediary collecting tens of millions from multiple parties involved in one transfer. But the biggest agencies don't even wait for a player to become valuable. They go looking long before that. They scout children, build relationships with families, and try to secure the most promising teenagers years before the rest of us have ever heard their names. The race has become so competitive that FIFA's own rules prevent agents from formally signing a player until he is close to his 16th birthday, and even then, only with written permission from his parents. When the rulebook has to step in that early, it tells you everything about how valuable those future careers have become. Because if you sign the player first, you don't just win one deal. You put yourself at the center of every contract, every transfer, and every major payday that follows. And eventually, football itself tried to stop them. That is when you find out who really holds the power. By 2023, FIFA had finally had enough. It introduced a new set of rules, including a hard cap on agent commissions, roughly 3% for representing one side of a deal, and up to 6% for representing more than one. The goal was obvious: make another Pogba-style payday impossible. So, what did the biggest agencies do? They didn't adapt. They sued. The same firms that had spent 2 decades consolidating the industry challenged the rules in courts across Europe. And one by one, the rulings went their way. An English tribunal declared the cap unlawful. A German court blocked it. Piece by piece, FIFA's flagship reform fell apart across the biggest transfer markets. And that's the real irony. The very advantages these agencies had spent decades building, the money, the lawyers, the influence, became the weapons they used against the one organization that tried to limit their power. They didn't just survive the new rules, they defeated the people who wrote them. The deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. Almost everything the public knows about the hidden flow of agent money traces back to a single leak. A Portuguese hacker named Rui Pinto gathered a colossal trove of confidential football documents, and through a network of European investigative journalists, that cache, known as Football Leaks, blew the lid off the secret commissions, the offshore companies, and the tangled webs of who really pays whom. Without it, the true Pogba numbers would still be sitting in the dark. The most famous figures in this entire story only exist in public because somebody stole the paperwork. So the next time a player changes clubs, don't just ask who bought him, and ask who had to be paid for the deal to happen. Because at the top of football, agents are no longer just representatives. They are gatekeepers. A small circle sitting between players, clubs, families, sponsors, and billions of dollars. They don't officially own the game, but they control many of the doors that lead to the top. You used to see a transfer. Now you'll see the cartel. Thanks for watching.